Hello, and welcome to this edition of Secure Networks, the Indays Packet Forensic Files, with your host, Michael Morris. This week's very special guest is Brian Ford, Assistant Professor of Computer Programming and Information Systems at Farmingdale State College and former Cisco Technical Marketing Engineer. Brian, welcome. Thank you for joining. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Thanks, Mike. I think you kind of captured it all. Brian Ford started in the industry, I guess, when Novell was a thing, and worked my way into TCP/IP networking. 23 years at Cisco went by pretty quickly. I jokingly say I was hired in '97. I was fired because I left Cisco in 2014. I was acquired by Cisco in 2016. I rejoined Cisco with the Lancope acquisition, and then finally retired from Cisco earlier, just in October of this year. So,
excellent. Well, glad to see you in the world of teaching security now. And you've been in the network security space for almost 30 years. What's the main thing you see SecOps teams lacking from a security expertise?
That's a great question, and thanks for that. So I guess I have been doing this for a long time, and literally throughout my career, I've been always tied in some way to education. I started out in Novell as a CNI, a certified Novell instructor. I joined Cisco. I helped train other employees, and I should point out I'm a longtime CCIE. My CCIE number is 2106, so I acquired that back in the 90s. But throughout all my learning about education and my espousing to others about education, I think one of the most important things that disconnects that I see, specifically going out and working with customers, is how training is very often disconnected from the organization. All right, when I say disconnected from the organization, I mean we teach people basically how various products work and network security works or should work, but we sometimes don't allow enough basically for the student to understand how that impacts their infrastructure and how that impacts the policies and the procedures of that organization. And so sometimes when students will come back to me and they'll say, you taught me all these really great things, but when I went back to my organization, I tried to implement them. There were organizational policies blocking me. I couldn't do that, or that's not the way we worked, or our network wasn't set up quite that way. So that's really important because the last several years, I think just the industry, we've started to focus on threat hunting. And we talk about basically building threat hunters. We're educating threat hunters, people that can go out and identify threats and better help protect organizations. And what my message is I think focused threat hunting that takes into account organizational infrastructure. What the assets look like, how the network is connected, how the network is put together, as well as organization in terms of the policies and procedures, the playbook about how they run the network, how they run IT. That's really important. So I think focused, and that's my pitch here, focused threat hunting is essential. And it's one of the things that we need to think about more and work towards.
Yeah, that's we're trying to figure out from our spaces how we help people get more value out of the tools and the integrations we do. What are some things analysts and security teams as a whole can really do to sharpen their skills or elevate their expertise?
Yeah, again, another great question. And for me, it's a really simple one. It's more practice, right? It's a matter of really unfortunate thing is, I would go out and I would get training when I was working at Cisco. The organization is phenomenal. And so if I saw a training course that was interesting, and I would make the time to go out and do it. And we train the staff that way. Mm-hmm. I mean, Cisco employees, even the sales folks, everybody, the technical solution architects, everybody has an opportunity to receive, 14 to 21, sometimes, more days of training per year. All right. And it's important. I mean, of course, in that organization, it's tremendously important. They need to know how the products work. But they need to go further. They need to, one of the things that, I was so, proud of at Cisco was the fact that the technical solution architects that we have there are trained not only on the products, but how the products plug into customer environments and different customer environments. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one of the things that, when I go out and I talk to customers, I want to see more often, and that I want to, one of the things I'm doing right now to help customers, or actually they're not customers anymore. They're just the folks that are out there doing this business. I'm basically talking to them about security operations centers and how to develop better muscle memory, how to make things more automatic and fit better, and policies work better in that security operations environment. And really the way to do that is more practice. So one of the things I'm pitching to everybody I talk to is I ask, how many days per month do your SOC analysts actually train? And so, one of the things I say is, let's start at one. Let's take one day where basically we take, a SOC analyst out of rotation and we have them train. We actually have them go through and look at data from the network environment, the network that we're actually protecting, and find things, what's relevant there, right? And talk to other people in the in that infrastructure and say, hey, I found this. Is this relevant? Right. And hearing from, the more senior people in that SOC environment, how things should be reported, how things should work. Right. It's so important in terms of, the environment, in terms of we turn and we basically say to these people, they have to make decisions about what is an actual alert, what is not an alert. We ask them to do it continuously. And this helps build those skills, build that muscle memory about basically identifying the real threat that they see, the real threats they see in that environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. I keep hearing more and more studies and data on the volume of of alerts and threats in a NOC or a SOC in any given day, and the numbers per SOC engineer is just off the chart. So they got to make decisions so quick. One of the questions that leads me to, and I'm sure you've got some good insights on, is how do teams move from that just reactive approach to SecOps to a much more advanced threat hunting, proactive maneuvers?
Again, good question. I think the training is important, and the training on the tools that are deployed in that environment is important. One of the things that I've seen and experienced in my own work is, we work in ever-changing environments, right? So we're, we go from basically using, say, Microsoft Teams to using Cisco WebEx to using Zoom. We go to basically from using essentially Exchange to using and deployed copies of Microsoft, products to using Office 365. That same transition, that same progression happens with security tools. And it's important, you have to know your tools. And you have to know your tools at a level, especially if you're trying to keep up with this level of work that's coming through. You have to know your tools. You have to know which tools to use and how to use those tools. One of the things I think is fantastic about the industry in general is, our tools are helping us get so much better in terms of developing metrics and measure things, right? Think about it for a second, how much we can improve those metrics if we just basically step back and said, well, wait a second, if I just show someone how to use this tool better so that they could basically get something done in 1 minute less time. Then you already have the background there to measure it. So I think that's what's most important. I think it's we need to basically work on helping our people we put into these roles to basically better understand the tools, be more and use them more efficiently.
Right. Well, that brings up a great point. So obviously the training is the foundation. What are some of those key tools or components that you believe they absolutely have to have for their security architecture to be effective in today's dynamic threat landscape?
Yeah. So I work in, and the folks that I'm now teaching, I hope are going to go to work in organizations, and they're going to work in a security operations role. So they're going to be the people that are a I like to think that I'm training tier 1 security operations center analysts, right?
Okay.
People that are going to be on the front line. Data is going to be coming in. They're going to be looking at that data. They're going to basically, use their knowledge of the tools to basically go and figure out what is a real alert, what should be escalated in the organization, and what basically is not really an alert. Or maybe it's an alert that basically goes to another part of the organization. Maybe it's not a security issue. Maybe it's a network operations issue. And so tools that are critical to this, there's a variety of different tools. I mean, that are critical to this. Of course, if we're looking at Cisco has its tools like Stealth Watch. It has its DNA Center. It basically has the Cisco Secure whole platform of tools. All right, and that's interesting, and because that basically is very often how some alerts get into the environment. But then there's the SIM tools. There's the security information and event management tools. The folks from Logarithms make some fantastic tools there. Splunk makes a great tool there. All right. And that basically is how we get into looking at the alerts, looking at the data coming out of all these tools that are in that infrastructure. But then we get into that next layer of tools that really the security analysts use. And again, variety of different tools there, but Endace plays an important role there. And that is, we talk about these alerts coming out, and the alert represents something that essentially a system saw, right, because of certain data that passed by. And where packet capture is so important is that's the data that passed by that set that alert off. And being able to go back and look at packet capture to understand why that alert went off, why that alert or multiple alerts were generated is so important. And so, there are a lot of packet capture tools out there. There's TCP dump, there's Wireshark, and they're great. I mean, I don't besmirch those. I use them all the time. But in a live organization, right, something happens, and reviewing it days later and saying, geez, maybe we should go back and set up Wireshark there, station running Wireshark, or
right.
Maybe we should go back to find a Linux box and run TCP dump, isn't really, that's not really possible. Or, you're then sitting there waiting for it to happen again. And so that's why it's so important that in a lot of organizations, network packet capture, all the time, network packet capture is so relevant. And I think that there's, when I've said this many times, people, oh, you don't understand, it's so expensive, we can't do it. There's so many smart organizations that I've worked with that have basically gone out and said, you know what, we don't have to capture all the voice conversations. We don't have to capture all the Zoom meetings that are going on.
Right.
So smart organizations will basically deploy these tools in such a way that it basically, that it ignores essentially things that are basically, essentially uninvestigatable, right? And they get to the real data. And that's critically important. That's tremendously important. That's actually, in terms of what I'm doing going forward, in terms of educating people, that's what I hope that my students will do after my class.
Right. No, that's an excellent point. And one of the things that kind of brings all this together, and I'm looking for how you recommend SecOps teams and CISOs handle this, the balance of they've got too many alarms, not enough time to spend for training, this sheer challenge of time and balancing it, right? One of the manager I always had that said the one equalizer we all have is time. And that's a tough trade-off, right? You're trying to keep up on the incoming flood of alerts. You're trying to spend time to train. You're trying to integrate your tools. What do you recommend people stop and think about and handle that balance?
So alarm fatigue is a real thing. I mean, I've been speaking about this. I spoke about this when I was at Cisco. The too many alarms is a real thing. All right. I worked with a group of brilliant people that basically came to Cisco several years ago from SourceFire. The developers of Snort. I just had unparalleled opportunity to basically go and get to know a lot of those folks and know that tool very well, and as well as work with, in terms of threat intelligence. I count myself as very lucky in that, I started off working threat intelligence years and years and years ago at Cisco, and met a whole bunch of those really very interesting and smart people. When I went to Landcope, we basically didn't use Cisco for threat intelligence at all. So I just met this whole cadre of other really smart, Team Kumri, yay. And then when I came back to Cisco, Talos had been created, and Talos was really running. So, and the Talos organization, again, world class. But what it comes down to is being smart enough with the tools to basically understand how the tools are configured. All right, I point out Snort specifically. Snort's a fantastic tool for a lot of organizations, but when you deploy Snort in an organization and you basically run, pulled pork, or the latest what we used to call pulled pork, the rule updater,
right?
There's thousands of rules come through, right? And you really need to basically have people who are smart enough, who are trained well enough to basically know to go through and basically what is important and what's not important. And you have to have people that have been trained in how to basically interpret when Snort issues an alert and it basically says this happened, oh, someone's using Dropbox again. That's the famous, there's a Snort alert about using Dropbox, there's a Snort alert about using Dropbox that often comes up today if you're using Microsoft Teams, right? But you need to know these things. You need to be trained on these things. So I think that comes down to alert logic, and that comes down to within an organization, the tier one analysts basically documenting and saying, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing this, being smart enough not to basically escalate it as essentially a security event, but instead of escalating it as an event that could be tuned. Something, if I go and if I'm a tier one analyst and I talk to, a tier two analyst, and I'm going to escalate this thing, and he goes, no, it's a Dropbox thing. You don't have to escalate it. How many times does that tier two analyst have to hear from a tier one analyst that, this is just a Dropbox thing, or it's a Microsoft Teams thing, before they actually go and they edit the rule set to basically go and take that signature and either suppress it or make it so that it comes up less often. That's really important. And that comes back to knowledge of the tool.
Right.
And that knowledge of the tool, it could be, don't do it in a live environment. These are the things that, my suggestion is that you have a non-live environment where you can basically go and, take your tier one analysts and take them offline one day a month, right? And have them work in a non-live environment, but with data captured from the live network, so that they understand how things are addressed, how the network is constructed, how the DNS, the internal DNS works, how the asset management system works, what's the interface to network operations, making it so that essentially they have a better understanding of these tools and more of a comfort level, so that they can go in and make themselves or make recommendations as to how to edit these tools. That's so critically important.
Yeah, what you bring up an interesting point too that I'd like to explore your thoughts on is one of the hottest tools or platforms in the space right now is SOAR, right? Security, Orchestration, Automation, and Response. How do you see that helping or hurting this skill gap, right? Because that's a process, computer handling some basic stuff, which is good because it's saving them time. But then, is there things being missed? What's your thoughts on it?
So again, that's a great point, and it's actually tremendously relevant to today, because so many organizations have security information and event management SIM systems, and they when we go back and we say how do you investigate something? Well, we go back and we look in the SIM, to figure out what happened, who alerted when in the past. In order for SOAR adoption to grow, people have to get more comfortable with the whole point of that orchestration piece, and being able to define the characteristics of something that you're going to respond to. And that's a real challenge, I think, in a lot of customer environments, because of the way that people have been trained. They don't go, they tend to they try to report or escalate things that are actually true security alerts, and they don't basically escalate things that are, geez, I saw 15 snort alerts about this, which it really happened, but it's not really a critical event. They're not modifying the tools. They're not basically customizing the tools. They're not going through and editing the signature libraries. and that's really important. SIM tools are great for basically finding what needs to be done, but the true allure and the true value of SOAR systems is basically going to be the actual acting on that. You have to be able to go and understand and edit the situation. The other thing the SOAR systems do is pretty much all the SOAR systems bring in threat intel. And again, threat intel is fantastic. All right, threat intelligence is wonderful, but somebody has to basically go and say, and again, this is more of a tier 3 or a SOC manager role of, in terms of the threat intel, what are the threats that we're most interested in this environment? All right, going to an organization that basically is a financial services organization, and talking to them about HIPAA compliance, not really a good thing. So you've got to basically, if you're getting that threat feed should be really emerging threats. It should be things that are relevant to your environment. And again, that's something that we have to learn, and we have to basically go and do more on in terms of escalating those things. I mean, you can become. I think the future is potentially becoming overwhelmed with threat intelligence data. The sources of threat intelligence data are there's a myriad of different places that you can get threat intelligence data, but coming online essentially are national certs basically going to be basically going and providing threat intelligence data. We already had the explosion of ISACs, right? And now we're going to have national certs basically going and providing threat intel data. It has to basically be again orchestrated. It has to basically go and it made sense for an organization. And in order to do that, you've got to step back, and you've got to train that security operations staff. You've got to basically enable those analysts.
That's a great point. And one of the things, the threat intel data, tying that together, I keep thinking about is the threats keep getting more sophisticated, more advanced. Combining this threat with this threat and making them work together, right? To get the access, then the infiltration, the reconnaissance, and then, obviously either destructiveness or exfiltration of data. What are some best practices or trainings you see companies doing to handle more of these advanced threats, right? These APTs as an example.
So again, really good question, because I think that a lot of the issues. So we see a lot of threats. There's like a constant noise level, right? And that a lot of that comes from the fact that if you go back 10 years and you look at if we were threat hunting 10 years ago, the folks that basically, and the threats that we saw, the things that were coming in were from the developers of that threat. So there were fewer things, but they were literally from the folks that were developing that capability. And so, once you basically understood how to respond, you were set. I think the problem today is that there's this constant noise level of things that are out there that are really not tremendously sophisticated, all right, but they're out there. So and that goes for knocking on the door and trying to basically take advantage of vulnerabilities. That goes to phishing, all right, which is huge. There are so many people out there that are using phishing tools to basically go and just trying to basically go and get in. It's hard. That noise level, that base level is difficult. The real threat, or the more important threat, in my mind, is the smaller group of black hats out there that basically can go and knit together 2 or 3 of those. Yeah. Those are the ones that are most dangerous. I mean, if we go back and we look at the successful web attacks over the past 5 years, some of them are. Being able to gain access to an organization is one thing, and being able to scout around inside is one thing. Being able to scout around inside and identify a pool of information, that's an escalation. That's the next step. Being able to basically gain access to that information and get to a point where it could be exfiltrated, right, is like the next step, right? Being able to actually create a mechanism for exfiltrating that information out of the network, that's it. That's and doing so without basically, providing essentially a direct path or a yellow line through the internet back to where you are. Those are the really, those are very, very important to a lot of customers.
Yeah.
And so being able to, go through that cyber kill chain and basically be able to understand where we are in that cyber kill chain and being able to respond adequately in the cyber kill chain, so important. And it's, I just talked about information exfiltration. That's a more complex environment. I mean, today, really a lot of what we're concerned about today is in terms of healthcare, in terms of utilities. Someone doesn't have to necessarily exfiltrate information. All they need to do is be able to gain access inside a network and be able to impact or affect different systems in the network. Medical, if they can basically impact any kind of medical device, all right? And again, ransomware, very little exfiltration of information, but if I can get my tools on board, I can deny you access to your data.
Yeah.
So understanding the kill chain and understanding where we are in the kill chain and being able to basically respond to the kill chain, I think that's critically important.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Brian. So one thing, again, I like to ask all of our guests for our listeners, what's the one thing you would recommend people really look out for or think about over the next 6 to 18 months? Everything's very dynamic right now, of course, but in the ever-shifting battle for cyber and network security, what do you think people should really be paying attention to?
And my whole point, and really what I'm doing is I'm trying to basically go and get people to better understand the tools they're using. Right. So use this time to basically better understand the tools they're using. I mean, there are, again, tremendous number of tools on the market, but if you go and talk to any particular organization, they have a subset of tools that they use. And use essentially where we're at right now in terms of the pandemic and a lot of people working remotely, use that time to basically go and train on those tools and develop better skills on those tools and better understanding of how those tools work in that organization's environment. That's what's critically important. I mean, certifications are fantastic. I mean, I train people to attain certifications. So naturally, I've got a horse in that race. But what's critically important, if I can train someone who can go out and interview and attain a job someplace and start adding value pretty quickly, that's fantastic. But for their long-term success, the thing I always basically tell my students is you have to understand that organization. You have to understand if there's a tool that we didn't cover that they use in that environment, you need to master that tool. I showed you how to master some tool, all right? I happen to work quite a bit with Security Onion. So it's a fantastic tool. It's used in a lot of organizations. I wish more organizations used it. But there's a lot of other great tools out there, very much like Security Onion, all right? That I then say, listen, I showed you how to do it here. Show me how to do it there. How you do those. And then more important, understand how it works in that environment and understand how to basically go and how that network is constructed and how that network is addressed and how DNS works in that network and how NTP works in that network, right? Gaining understanding of all of the fundamentals of that network is important. And then the third part is basically understanding, again, how that organization operates, understanding their playbook, their security operations playbook, understanding their run book, understanding how IT works in an organization. And understanding, I mean, when it comes down to it, I mean, understanding what organizational policies are. Right. A lot of organizations will basically go and, their organizational policies are such that if you do something wrong, it's basically you'll be admonished or you'll be fired. All right. However, if you're doing criminal activity, some organizations will go as far as to basically call up law enforcement. That's something I don't think enough organizations really think about. But when the laws are broken, all right, it becomes more of an organizational issue and more of a societal issue. So, the impact, law enforcement's there to help. All right. And it's something that I think, maybe the paths could be, better utilized. So.
No, Brian, that's excellent insights. And certainly from my perspective, every time I talk to you, I learn something new on the security front. So you're my absolute source for training for sure, buddy.
No, thanks,
I appreciate you taking a little bit of time. Thank you for joining and sharing your insights.
Thank you, man.
We'd ask our listeners to tune in next time for another edition of the Endace Packet Forensic Files. For more information about Endace's network packet capture platform and our integrations with our fusion technology partners like Cisco, please go to endace.com. Brian, again, thank you, and thank you all.